Hello and welcome to the A-List. Joining me today is Mike Scott. Thank you for joining me, Scott.
Good to be here.
So, what exactly do you do?
I'm the news director at WIND Radio in Chicago. We have a morning show, John and Cisco in the morning, and I'm the news director. I do newscasts both on the top and the bottom of the hour, providing folks with local information on Chicago news, both breaking and full and voiced reports from other reporters. We bring it all together and do 2 to 2.5 minutes on the top of the hour and 90 seconds on the bottom.
Wow, sounds like you're a pretty busy guy. I mean, so how many people do you have under you at like the given time?
Normally, in a news department, you would have 2 or 3 other anchors and 2 or 3 other reporters. The station is in transition now, so I literally am the only news person right now at the station, which, given all the cutbacks in broadcasting in general, is not all that unusual. So you wear many hats. You do a lot of different things. You access a lot of different resources when you're the only person there versus having a different staff coming in at different times of the day.
Okay, well, you're a man of many hats, or many trades.
Well, you have to be, yeah. You have to be able to edit tape. You have to be able to voice your own reports for other radio stations. You have to be able to pull from multiple sources at the same time. So you have to have your head a little bit on the swivel in the morning.
So how exactly did you become interested in the whole media career?
Well, I didn't start out longing to be a broadcaster. I was not one of these folks who grew up wanting to be a sportscaster or a journalist. Grew up wanting to be a teacher, or actually grew up studying, coming right out of high school to be a youth pastor.
Really?
And eventually transitioned into an education career. And in the middle of my junior year of college, went home for Thanksgiving to a friend's house. She later would become my wife, and met the local radio station operator on the street, and he literally offered me a job on the spot.
Wow, was it because of your voice, or like, how did he just offer you the job?
Well, it had a lot to do with the fact that he needed somebody right away. But I had been involved in musicals and plays. I had been involved in theater. I've been a musician vocally in high school and in college. So I had the vocal training necessary, so he heard my pipes and thought that was a match. And it just seemed to work out. It was an opportunity I jumped on at the time. College kid, short on money.
Yeah, obviously.
Needed a job, and it turned out to be a very good decision.
Okay, so that's how you got into it. Now that you've been in it for a while, how long have you been in it, actually?
25 years.
All right, so 25 years, where has it taken you in all those years?
It's taken me on quite an odyssey through the Midwest. Started at WHCO Radio in Sparta, Illinois, which for those who have brothers and sisters or relatives who live or in and around SIU Carbondale, It's only about 20 minutes north of there. Started at that station and then very quickly transferred to stations in suburban St. Louis. And then going from there to my hometown of Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I was both in sports and news full-time. And then in 1994, transitioned here to Chicago.
Okay, so when you transferred to Chicago, where did you go?
I started out working for the Tribune Company,
really?
which had a program that went to 150 stations around the U.S. and Canada overnight, a truckers network.
Oh, wow.
And they syndicated it to about 150 stations. And I did newscasts, top and bottom of the hour. 5 minutes on top of the hour and 2 minutes on the bottom. And was the voice of their truckers network for about a year.
Okay, well, you've been around the block at least a couple times. So we know where you've gone and we know how you got into it. So who have you met through this entire experience?
It's been an incredible, wonderful ride all the way through, starting at WHCO all the way to here in Chicago. Met many folks, politicians, actors, all sorts, musicians. Mostly here in Chicago, though, I've met some of the big players, names people will recognize. Had the opportunity to work with Dick Kay and Andy Shaw. Had an opportunity to cover Chicago City Hall with Fran Spielman of the Sun-Times, Gary Washburn, now retired from the Chicago Tribune, veteran great writers. Worked with most of the TV folks you would recognize, most of the radio folks. Bob Crawford, who's retired from WBBM Radio, one of my mentors at City Hall. Craig Dellamore, who's there now, just most of the names. I've worked with some of the wacky names as well, just doing some odd jobs for Mancow and for Steve Dahl, for Jonathan Brandmeier, Steve Cochran, who's on WGN Radio. I've had an opportunity to be part of his shows in the past as well.
Wow, that's really impressive. So, I mean, you've been around a lot. You've been around for a long time. You've met a lot of people. Would you have any words of advice for people that wanted to possibly join the media field?
Sure. It's one thing to want to be a part of journalism and broadcasting. It's another thing to be prepared for. The thing I urge all my young interns at WIND to really align themselves on are courses that train them to be very good writers. You need to be a good writer, even more so than being a good speaker.
Really?
You need to write well. If you write well, because remember, in broadcast, you have 7 to 10 words to get the attention of a viewer or a listener. That's really limits your time, 2 to 3 minutes. 2 to 3 seconds of time to grab their attention. So writing is a skill, and it's a necessity.
So you basically have to have really good wording in order to capture the focus.
Sure, absolutely. I would also encourage folks to train your voice. Being a musician certainly helps. Being in front of folks in plays and musicals certainly helps train you. Forensics is a great training ground for those who want to both learn how to speak prepared from a prepared script, but also extemporaneously, which is another part of forensics, which is really fun. Extemporaneous speaking in the news field is a great asset. A lot of that comes for me from my background in sports, being in play-by-play. You learn to speak extemporaneously off the cuff all the time, and that skill definitely translates into news.
Okay, so what sports did you announce for? Where did you?
Mostly high school, both here in Illinois. I did some college, Central Michigan University, and a few other smaller schools in and around Grand Rapids, but mostly high school related football and basketball. Lots of fun, state championship games.
Oh, wow.
Lots of other fun regional games in Grand Rapids primarily. It was a good training ground, met a lot of great coaches, met a lot of great athletes, but was put into really good positions to learn not only how to prepare well, but how to actually to handle tough situations and situations that come up in sports and in news that challenge you to actually be descriptive and use good word pictures.
Yeah,
to tell
absolutely.
folks what's going on.
Yeah, because I know obviously it seems kind of self-explanatory, but when you're in radio, you really have to rely on painting a picture for the audience. They don't have the TV to look at.
That's right. That's why writing is so important and being descriptive in your language. Fairness and accuracy play a part in that too. You can only report on what you see. You can't embellish, and you cannot use the camera to back you up. So fairness and accuracy is also very important. You can't paint an inaccurate picture for folks of what you see, both from, for example, when you're covering the president. I've had the opportunity to cover several presidential events and be a pool reporter nationally for radio. And you have to report what you see, and editors will call you and say, well, why didn't you tell me that this is what happened in the background, or this is a question that was asked that you didn't report? Well, sometimes you don't hear those things, or you're distracted by the job you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But many times you have to have all eyes on and all hands on so you know what's going on.
Wow. So you really need to stay focused for the entire time because you miss one big question and that's just kind of it.
Many times the question you miss or the opportunity that presents itself to you to ask a question comes at a split second. Again, it goes back to preparation, doing some work beforehand. Also, framing up questions in your mind so they're quick, concise, and to the point beforehand. But yes, also keeping your head on a swivel. When you're an offensive lineman or a linebacker in football, keeping your head on a swivel, moving, seeing everything that's going on so you can report on it later,
Okay, so what exactly was one of your favorite places that you've worked at? I mean, do you have any, this was it, this was your favorite place, or?
I think there's some favorite moments. The favorite station I worked at, just from a collaboration standpoint and the high quality and caliber of talent, from a news and sports perspective, was at WCUZ in Grand Rapids, where we were the #1 rated news station in town. We were the first computerized news station in Michigan at that point, so we were very cutting edge using computers when very few stations were to actually write and edit copy and receive copy. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoy working at WIND because I'm not only the news director, but I'm also part of the morning show, and that gives you a chance to flex your muscle a little bit and be called on to validate points or to bring historical data or factual data to bear on a pretty high profile, high powered talk show.
Okay, so you've already told us a small amount about what you do at WIND. Mm-hmm. Could you elaborate on that some more?
Sure.
What exactly do you do on a daily basis?
Usually arrive at the station somewhere between 3:30 and 4 o'clock. Probably around 3:45 is key time for me.
Wow. So what time do you wake up?
I'm usually up around 2:30 in the morning.
Oh.
So I'm up at 2:30. You'll see me driving through Riverside and getting out of Dodge and heading up to the station. And when that happens, you're flipping on 4 or 5 different computers, a couple of different television monitors. At that point, you're already starting to suck in information. During the drive up, I've already had 4 or 5 radio stations already pre-selected on gathering data from those radio stations as well too. Really haven't seen a newspaper yet. Newspapers really, for me, don't come in until much later in the process, because the first thing I attack is actually establishing templates and top stories for the day. Then you start adding sound, gathering sound, seeing what Fox News Radio for us has sent in, or for example, seeing what Associated Press Radio has sent in, or other sources that we have, State House News from Springfield, and other sources that we have. The audio is critical. It's radio, so audio can tell stories that you can't tell. So editing that tightly and letting it tell the story as well is critical. Then once 5 o'clock rolls around, I do my first newscast. And then you're in the grind. You're sort of in the trenches. You really don't see or hear much of anything, except for checking your sources, checking television, checking your wire copy, checking your other information sources that are coming in. And at that point, you also start flipping through the newspapers, because I'm not doing show prep at that point. I have to be active in writing and active in editing, and then you go in and let sometimes newspaper fill in the cracks.
Okay, so basically you're saying as you're driving to work, you're already pulling information for the stuff you're going to report on that day?
Sure, oh absolutely. You're tuning in key radio stations, different newscasts that are popping up at certain times on the clock, on the hour, listening to different talk shows because they may have breaking information that a newscast that has everything already pre-written in it doesn't have in it. So you're already gathering, you're up and gathering right from the get-go in the morning, and you really do not stop gathering information until your last newscast. For me, that's 11:30.
Wow. So what do you do during the day in regards to like editing the audio and such?
Well,
do you do the actual editing of it?
Sure, yeah. It's all computerized, which is very different from how we started 25 years ago when it was all tape. And we literally had to take a razor blade to tape and then put your edits together and then tape that edit together, and hopefully you did it well. You literally have gone from using a razor blade to just using a cursor. It's amazing the transformation of the business. It makes my job much faster, but it's easier to make mistakes with computerized editing and the software that we use. Because if you do too fast, you might edit out a word or mistakenly plop a word in the middle of a place when you've cut and paste where you didn't mean to. So you've got to be careful.
Wow. So you do a lot of work throughout the day, and you're saying that your day goes to about 11:30.
That's right.
At that point, do you head home?
At that point, we're headed home, and also at that point, I'm still looking at things in the rearview mirror. What did we miss? Looking ahead, game planning for the next day. What stories stood today that will have follow-ups tomorrow? So I'm always game planning in my head. What am I going to see tomorrow morning when I come in? I'm also looking at a newscast at 4 or 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, just to get for me, that's like a 10 o'clock newscast.
Oh, wow.
Because I'm in bed by between 8:30 and 9 o'clock at night. So for me, a 5 or 6 o'clock newscast is like a 10 o'clock newscast for everyone else. So I'm seeing where stories stand, so I have a good idea when I wake up what I need to follow up on, what stories have broken, and what are continuing to be debated. For example, a political issue in Washington or Springfield that has a long-term string to it.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today. I'm Luke Jebb, and with me is Mike Scott. Have a great day.